This podcast is part of the Treksphere Network.
To find more Star Trek-related content, visit Treksphere.com.
This feels like, the title kind of feels like it's a video game.
Oh, totally.
It's like Call of Duty Fallen Hero.
Right.
It just evokes kind of a militaristic, I don't know. Anyway, as you know, this is The Measure of an Episode, where it is our continuing mission to explore what makes a Star Trek episode a genuine Star Trek episode, and not just boring soap opera.
Jag.
Jag. I forgot about that show. My parents loved that show. Loved it. They would TiVo it. It would just be Jag, 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 Jag. Jag is going to lead if you don't watch Jag.
Parents just start talking in Jag.
I'm Paul.
I'm Jonathan. And we do this... Did you finish? Yeah. And we do this with using three criteria. The first one is there sci-fi in the plot? Is that sci-fi presented in a unique manner? And the third is there a moral or ethical dilemma that a character must face? I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Paul. And this week we watched Enterprise. Star Trek Enterprise, Season 1, Episode 22, Fallen Hero. And the blurb is as follows. Enterprise, by the way, they don't say the Enterprise when they're referring to this show specifically. In the other blurbs for Next Gen, they will say the Enterprise is planning a trip. And this one they say Enterprise is planning a trip to the relaxation planet Risa when it gets an urgent request, not receives an urgent request or is ordered, but they get an urgent request from the Vulcan High Command. It's like, what is it with bad vocabulary or just lazy vocabulary in these blurbs?
So before we get into the episode, I want to read to you the next two blurbs, and I want to kind of talk about, like, this is the serial aspect that I like. We've got Desert Crossing, and this is for episode 23, and it says, Enterprise is on its way to Risa when yet again another urgent matter comes up, a distress call. It comes from a small vessel. And then episode 24 is, after several delays, the Enterprise crew gets some well-deserved shore leave on the famed pleasure planet Risa. So they have an arc over these few episodes that makes it serialized, but the episodes are self-contained, so you can watch them out of order, and you're not super confused about, you know, what they're talking about. It's just kind of a little backstory, not even a B plot. It's just kind of a little thing that they want to do in the background, which happens in all episodes. You know, people are just living their lives, and so this is the kind of episodic serialization that I would like to see in Star Trek, in Strange New Worlds, in, you know, so like it's not so serialized like Discovery and Picard where you can't watch them out of order, but it's not so episodic like the original series where things happen in previous episodes that are completely forgotten about.
Although that stops working in like the fourth season.
Yeah, in in season 4 there's a lot of previously on. And DS9 kind of does the same thing with episodes where they will say like it's almost, I think I've talked about this, it's almost like the X-Files where they give you a previously on and they show you the episodes that you need to be aware of and you need to have in mind before this episode starts. Otherwise, there will be things where you're like, wait, what's going on?
Where it just, there's so much you don't know that you check out. What you were saying about the season 3 and 4 of Next Gen, where, yes, you can watch them having not watched seasons 1 and 2, but you're missing out on some stuff because they're making references. And that's ultimately what I like about serialized. It's actually what I liked about Picard, was that it was just a giant 10-episode movie or 10-hour movie. And I prefer that format over any kind of episodic thing because I don't like the reset. I want there to be a continuation of what's happening. So I'm glad that television has gone in that direction, but I understand why not all of it can.
I feel like we're both kind of saying the same thing, but you know, you're kind of saying you like the 10-hour movie, and what I'm saying is I like each episode to stand by itself, but things that happen in the previous episodes are still being considered. You know, kind of like what we talked about last week with Wesley having survivor's guilt. You know, like that it doesn't need to be mentioned every single episode, and it doesn't need to be. We don't need it to be referenced. You know, oh yeah, Wesley's still feeling guilty because Antilles died while he was on his lunch break.
But it's considered. It's considered when they write the show. They have it in their back pocket. Yeah.
Yeah, like Wesley.
There's a continuity.
Exactly. Wesley's a little bit angrier. Wesley kind of secludes himself a little bit more. When people talk to him, they're a little bit more tender about it, you know. And
he tortures puppies.
Right. And every 3 episodes or so, like they kind of mention, they have to explain to somebody what happened just as a point of reference, but it's not mentioned every single time. And, he's not always a character in the episodes to show how he's dealing with it. It's just, that's his life now. And when he's not in an episode, he's not in an episode.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have to be about him the entire time, which is kind of the downfall of Picard, is that it seems to be about the Thing all the time.
Right.
The Thing being Picard's problem or Picard's mission. It's always about that thing, and we can never let go of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're talking about in terms of it being episodic still, where, yes, we have this person who's torturing puppies, but we don't. That's not the plot line of every single episode.
Right. Like,
torturing puppies.
It's a character change from a pivotal moment in an episode, but you don't necessarily have to have seen that episode to watch the next episodes, or you're not going to be super confused by him. Like yes, somebody losing an arm in an episode and then like having a bionic arm later on, like if you're watching them completely out of order, that's going to get a little confusing.
I would love that though. They just have random, like sometimes they have bionic arms and sometimes they don't.
Right.
It's like, what am I missing?
But yeah, I would like that more, for there to be actual character growth and development intentionally in these shows rather than put in because people are getting older or because they're doing a serialized arc where, you can't watch one episode without watching the previous one.
I think this is a good reason why I don't think Enterprise is as good of a show as Next Gen, but I do think that I still enjoy watching it because it has a more modern take. It follows the more modern aesthetic of of pacing for television, of plot lines with television. It just was a little bit more progressive in that sense, and I think that's what I enjoy about it. This episode notwithstanding.
Right. Which is kind of interesting to me because I feel like this episode is very similar to the last one. Just instead of it being with scientists, it's a little bit more of an adventure side of thing where we are not given information. It is kind of a slow reveal. Yeah, no, having said that, I'm like thinking about last week's episode and this week's episode.
How much work are you willing to do?
Right. Yeah, this one's a little bit more like, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, I trust you, I'll tell you.
I waited for that. That's what I waited for.
Right. Oh, you mean there's corruption in government? What? Oh, sorry, spoiler for those who haven't watched it yet.
Well, so here's the problem with Enterprise so far for me, is when they have good episodes, they kind of nail it.
Right.
They kind of do a great job of hitting all of those marks, and the pacing is great, the music is great, and it's a good science fiction episode.
Yeah.
But when they miss the mark, it's like, have you ever done archery?
Yes.
It's not that it sort of hits on the outer rim of the target.
Right. Like they're looking the wrong way.
Yeah, it's just like you'll never find this arrow again.
Right.
Because and the opening to this episode is very emblematic to that. Where they have this whole dinner conversation about I kind of like the way they did it, although it doesn't live up to the way they did it, which is we cut in after T'Pol has said something.
Yes.
And they're sort of reacting to something we have not heard yet.
Right.
And it's like, you think, basically what they say is, you think that the crew needs to have more sex. Mm-hmm. And this could have all been done in an opening log that was 10 seconds long. All of the information that we get in the first 2 scenes, the one in the mess hall or the captain's dining room, and the other on the bridge when they're talking about going to Risa, all that 5, 6, 7 minutes could have been done in a 10-second log. The crew has been getting antsy. We think that we've been on it for 10 months. We've decided to take some R&R on this strange planet that we heard of called Risa. End of log.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the reason I say it's emblematic of the whole episode and when Enterprise misses the mark is that this whole episode is just them marking time. Every single scene, we don't really learn new stuff.
Right.
Or we do learn new stuff as the episode goes on, but it's almost like every other scene that happens.
Yeah. Well, and the stuff we learn is kind of either stuff that could have been inferred or stuff that it's not enough.
Yeah, it's very light on content. It's almost like it's half an episode or the B plot to an episode.
Yeah. Which, was there a B plot in this episode? I don't think there was. I mean, I guess Ryza is kind of the B plot, but it drops away
never
at
go,
the moment.
though.
Yeah.
Okay, so Archer is ordered to retrieve sort of a mysterious Vulcan ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess T'Pol is getting, we're set up to think she's going to be this very monkish or nunnish, because she's a woman, Vulcan, who just all they do is meditate in a blank room all day. And when they work, they work. And when they're not working, they're just meditating.
And she turns out none of that.
She's none of those things. And T'Pol is very disappointed. What
you're just going to go with none? Like you're not noticing the pun on that? That's fine.
No, I don't get it. Oh! They flew right by me.
Right? I mean, even the second time, you're like, yeah, what are you talking about?
It's like my arrow metaphor.
Right.
And so eventually, Ambassador Vajudi Vadench comes on board, and we learn that she's not what we were set up to, what she was set up to be.
Wait a minute. I'll have to check this, but just hearing you say Vajudi Vadench, isn't she the gal who actually played the Vulcan? Isn't that Data's mom?
Oh
man,
I did not have enough information.
Right,
listeners.
Okay. Well, let's see if anybody calls in to let us know. What? That is her name? Fionnuala Flanagan? Wow. No way.
That sounds like it should be the first name to the protagonist in Brave, Pixar's Brave.
Right.
But it's not. The end of Pixar trivia.
Yep, I'm right.
Oh, really? Wow,
yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah, just
thinking an upgrade.
Thinking back on her face. She plays Juliana Tainer, which is Data's mom, and then she plays Ambassador Valar. She also played on DS9 Anina Tandro in the episode Dax, which we haven't watched yet, but that's coming up.
Wait a minute, Data's mom?
Yeah.
When does Data have a mom?
In the episode Inheritance, where like they pick her up.
Oh, right. Yeah, and it turns out, okay, I remember now.
Yeah. Spoil. Like, don't tell anybody. Anyway, yeah, so Data's mom. Data's mom shows up. Looking
Data's mom.
Older, like in the past.
Yeah. Oh, are we going to maintain that it is Data's mom and that this person has continuity over the entire canon of Star Trek?
Yeah, you're telling it, so you do what you want.
Oh,
but yes, we are.
But the answer is yes.
So we can go anywhere you want to eat, anywhere but there.
Okay. So here's the B plot. The B plot is T'Pol and her disappointment with Ambassador Vajudi,
right?
Because that's the only other thing that's happening in the episode. There's this whole idea that we don't know why the ambassador has been accused of a crime. It doesn't make any sense to T'Pol. It doesn't make any sense to anybody because we don't know any information.
Right.
And we find out that she, I guess, was ousted by somebody, and we get the sense that she's sort of a rebellious.
Right. I mean, even that we don't know. So she finally confesses to Archer that she was spying on all the politicians because there was corruption. And the only way they could get her off the planet was by having her lose her credibility. And they felt that she would be safe. And that didn't happen. And that's what we know. Like, it turns out she was not safe. The end.
Right. I didn't understand why it had to be kept a secret from Archer.
Of who knew?
Of why the ambassador was being so close to the vest about all of the information to Archer. She obviously trusted Archer because she was trusting him to take her to wherever she needed to go. And Archer points out that the Vulcans would rather sacrifice one of the humans' ships rather than one of the Vulcan ships, but they trust him at least enough to get the job done of getting her from point A to point B.
Right.
So why not just tell him? I don't understand. And we all we learn is that there's this other sect of aliens who are trying to kidnap Vajudi to, I guess, kill her?
Yeah, that's what I took from it, that they were trying to get her to kill her, and then the problem solved. Like, okay. And not only is the informant killed, but it's also sending a message to anybody else who was planning to expose the corruption.
Got it. Okay. And then, so a lot of this episode is them being chased by these aliens who want to kidnap Vadench, Ambassador Vajudi Vadench, and And I felt that was the most compelling part, where their chasers, they knew that their pursuers could only go like warp 4.5 or something like that, and the Enterprise can go warp 5. And so there's kind of a little bit of science fiction happening where they're saying let's try and push it to the max if we can. But it felt like every opportunity that this show gets to do a little bit of fun sci-fi procedural stuff, they opt not to. Because when Archer says, "Isn't this a warp 5 ship?" Trip just says, "On paper." And then that's the end of the conversation. He's just,
right.
Well, give it to me. It's like, why can't there be, if this were Next Gen, there'd be a whole part where Geordi's trying to coax a little bit more speed out of the engine.
Well, yeah, we would stay with the engineering room and have him kind of like flirting with the computer. Come on, give me a little bit more.
Yeah, smacking it on the ass,
No, I mean, there would be somebody there where he'd be like, wait a minute, if we, and then whatever,
right.
reverse the polarity and change the index,
etc.
Yeah, change the variation to 0.2 instead of 0.27. That should give us what we need. Let's try it, yeah. And
that would at least be something where the tension is not just, can we get there? I don't know. Let's find out. Versus them setting a goal, them giving us some plausible struggle to attain that goal, and then getting there at the end. That's more fun. And they just don't do it. I felt like they just don't do that, at least in this episode.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's a very weak episode, very weak plot line. I just didn't care. Did you care at all at any point?
I didn't care about the secret. I cared about like kind of what the objective was, which was were they going to get her to the Vulcans in time? And I really did like that Archer, was kind of a dick. Like he's like, if you're not going to tell me, then it's not my problem, and I'm just taking you back.
Well, I'm with Archer.
Oh yeah,
he was risking his life and the life of his crew for something he didn't know anything about, and he wasn't about to do it.
Right. Yeah. No. I
the
completely...
one thing. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you this time. The one thing. What?
That was one of the more interesting parts for me about this episode was the part where they talk about how the humans were becoming resentful because we keep keeping things from them, and if we keep doing that, they're just going to become more resentful. And it kind of gave us a little inside look as to the very new relationship between Vulcans and humans. And that was, as they say in this episode, 90 years ago when humans were introduced to the Vulcans. I like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because you have these two very different types of races who are trying to coexist together and are not compatible at all, Right. So it could have been cool to see a little bit more into that. And she kind of was that. She was certainly the most human Vulcan that we've seen.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
So far. So I don't know, but they didn't really explore that either. It just was a little bit of a salt grain.
Well, yeah, and it was to kind of not undermine, but not discredit either, but just kind of show that everything that T'Pol thought was incorrect about Videnge.
Yeah, I agree. It just, I don't know, it felt very underwritten.
The premise to the story was, how would a Vulcan ambassador get discredited? Or like, how would a Vulcan ambassador be like fall from grace? And what makes that frustrating is that like their decision was, well, only if they chose to be by pretending to be.
Because they were being so secretive about it, we didn't even get to really explore what it was like to be a Vulcan.
Right.
Or a Vulcan ambassador. It's like, oh, we meditate a lot. Yeah, I've heard that.
Oh, so you're like every other Vulcan. Got it.
Yeah. Oh, shocking.
Yeah.
So there are two things that were very interesting to me about this episode. Number one is that Risa is apparently a sex planet. It's not just sort of a resort planet where they're all beaches and the climate is just 72 degrees all the time. It's actually a sex planet, according to T'Pol.
Well, I mean, she said it's a relaxing place where people are more open to easing tensions.
To release, yeah, which was code for sex.
Right.
Like you can go have sex on Rice. That's why everybody likes it.
Yeah,
we should go there.
It just seems like it's a very free, I mean, that's how it was on Next Generation. It's just a very free liberal planet where, you can find anyone at any time to do whatever.
Oh, right. But I never thought that Next Gen was as explicit as this was. Only because this is my first time in learning that Risa is a sex planet from this episode.
Oh, no. Like they're... Well, when we get to the Next Generation episodes, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better at hiding it. Maybe I'm immature.
I mean, you probably like saw these episodes when you were 12 and 13, and since it's not explicitly stated,
right?
Like,
an idiot.
No, it's just I mean, I don't. Maybe you just haven't watched those episodes recently enough.
I probably haven't.
Yeah.
No, I remember thinking of Risa as just being a beach planet and seeing Picard in shorts that were too short.
But what happened? Like, I think the very first time they come down, they show everybody in their uniforms, and like the people walk up and they're like, "Oh, hello," and like grab them and just like pull them off in different directions.
That's Risa?
I think so.
I thought that was a different planet.
Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but
I thought that was the episode where
Wesley steps on the grass.
He steps on the grass and they want to execute him. We really misread this place.
I mean, that's not why they wanted to kill him. That was just the excuse they gave.
Yeah. And the other thing about this was time. So there's a point where Ambassador Vidench is talking to Archer, and there's this idea. The whole point of the conversation was that Vulcans still look at humans as this barbaric race.
Yes.
They were having a world war, and after they were discovered, and we don't think you're ready yet, was the implication.
Right.
Or the inference, rather. And Archer said, a century of good behavior hasn't changed your mind. And I thought to myself, how confusing would this be? Because a century is not universal. It's very specific
right.
to our solar system.
Right.
So using that kind of language, and I'm assuming that the universal translator is not doing this. It's not doing math for people. It's just translating the word. So especially in this particular instance, which I don't even think there's a universal translator. There isn't, because she says I'm going to work on my English. So this whole idea that there wouldn't be some sort of universal time standard that's based on something universal, like the decay of an atom.
Right. Well, it either hasn't been presented, or it must not be, because the UFP hasn't been formed yet.
UFP.
The United Federation of Planets.
Oh, I see. Well, but in next gen, they say stuff like year. We won't be there for another 20 hours and 15 minutes, and it's been 16 years since I've seen you. And they're saying all this to aliens, and I suppose perhaps the universal translator is doing math and then translating that into their language with their own time scale.
Right.
But I would think that when you get into an airplane, for example, you have to learn English if you do not speak it. That is the universal language spoken in the air, no matter what country you're from.
Interesting.
And that's so it's not confusing.
Right.
When you get up there, it's like when somebody says, hey, you're driving straight at us, stop, that you can understand them, et cetera. So the fact that there wouldn't be some sort of time, especially when they're traveling at warp and there's all this time stuff, although I guess that doesn't happen in Star Trek because they're not going at warp speed or light speed. This
is probably why it's such a process to get into the United Federation of Planets, because you do have to change your time system, basically.
I don't get that. I thought that they just were using Earth time. Maybe that's the standard?
Well, maybe it
they
is.
Said Earth is the standard.
Yeah, like maybe it was established that just because Archer was one of the founding members of the United Federation of Planets, and they were kind of the linchpin to bring everyone together. So maybe everyone was fine with using Earth time.
So as a dissent to that idea, I like that idea, but let's take Vulcans who look at humans as just these country bumpkins.
Right.
Who are barely out of their infancy in terms of a civilization. You think they're going to adopt our time scale?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like, so we still have another 10 years, I think, before the Federation of Planets is formed. And it could be, again, because Earth was the one who either thought of it or encouraged it and actually made it happen, that the Vulcans were kind of like, oh, okay, we were wrong about this. And if the majority of the planets agreed to using Earth time, Vulcans would have to see that the most logical thing is that to just go ahead and accept Earth time. Speaking of, sorry, I'm going to go back to the plot. Speaking of the most logical thing to do, when Archer says, well, you haven't been captured yet, and she's like, but that's the most logical choice, and he says, then you haven't really been paying attention to humans or whatever. The logical choice is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So if there's any chance that she's going to survive, they need to pursue that. Like, that would be the most logical choice.
Right, but they don't know what's happening. At least the humans. I guess she does, though.
Right, but she was saying, like, I'm just going to turn myself in so we can, you can you can slow down, and he's like, well, it hasn't come to that yet.
Yeah, I didn't like that became sort of one note for Ambassador Vidench, because she was like, well, I'm ready to turn myself over. Just let's do it. I'm going to go kill myself.
Right.
She says that in 2 or 3 scenes. It's
yeah.
Like, Captain Archer, just hand me over.
And this kind of just speaks to your point about the episode. Is just that there wasn't enough meat in there, and there wasn't a second plot for this to feel like it needed an hour.
It was half an episode in terms of content.
And this is kind of a
faux show.
An interesting thing to say. Like, they could, I would bet that they could have done this episode and the next 2 episodes as 2 episodes. So make this trilogy a 2-parter instead.
That might have been how they were writing. They may have said, okay, they may have laid out the episode, the writers did, in terms of stuff that happens along the course of whatever it is, 22 episodes. And they don't chop it up. It's not this linear thing. There are these overarching, overlapping plot lines. Mm-hmm. And they have to decide kind of arbitrarily where to cut them in half. Because obviously, as you pointed out at the beginning of our episode, that they have this whole trip to Risa. That could have been an arc that they drew on a whiteboard that got chopped into 2 or 3 sections because of all these different plot lines that they had to subdivide to make episodes.
Yeah, because the next one seems to be a very similar thing. I forget what it said, but yeah, there was just something about another stowaway or another person that needed to be carried away or whatever it was, and so it just kind of seems like they could have mixed those 2 episodes. Like, maybe she's the arc between the 2 episodes of getting to Risa, and the next episode was part of this episode. I mean, we'll find out later, but...
So I had a bit of an epiphany just now.
Okay.
As I wasn't listening to you.
Right.
I feel like whenever there's political stuff,
mm-hmm.
I tend to not like it. I feel like they always get mired. And DS9 is I think the worst about this.
Right. But there really wasn't anything political in it. Go ahead.
Well, the whole reason that she was talking about the council and all that stuff. And that was sort of the basis for the foundation of this episode. And whenever they do that, I always feel like this is when I think it's not a proper episode.
Right.
Because they spend so much time creating all of the politics and the ambassadors and that you can do this and you can't do that and we have to sit in a room and talk about it. And when you're doing that, you're not doing science fiction exciting stuff. And I wonder, is there a reverse correlation to that or inverse correlation?
Meaning what?
Meaning that whenever there's a politically based episode, that it can therefore not be a proper Star Trek episode.
Oh no, I disagree with that. I think we have hit one with DS9, but this episode still would have been a weak episode, even if instead of it just being a political ambassador, if she was smuggling some kind of sci-fi weapon that could change the face of. Like, whatever, like a terraforming device.
Sir.
The terraforming device, the new Genesis device from Star Trek 2 or 3.
Right, but they didn't do that, and they don't seem to do that. That doesn't really happen that often.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you could replace her, like, not even replace her, but use her, and just instead of her being a political ambassador, she's carrying around this device and have the same dialogue and have the same problems, and the story this would not be a good Star Trek episode. It would be very weak.
Right, but aside from it being good or bad, I'm saying proper. And I feel like because they feel the need to unpack all this political stuff that they create, that they don't give themselves time to do the other stuff. And so by virtue, there's an inverse correlation of political to not proper.
There are good episodes, but now I'm wondering whether or not they are proper. And maybe they're not. Maybe that is a problem. Maybe they get too focused on the political side of things that they can't, like, it's one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, let's keep an eye on that one.
Right.
Is it perhaps a 4th criteria? It's more mathematical, though. Right? If this is, then this other is not.
Right. And it's
not really criteria.
I mean, so Star Trek, it's not that Star Trek isn't a place for politics. It absolutely is. But it's a little bit more where it's presented in a sci-fi manner. And if it's just straight up politics, that could be on any show. And so it doesn't have to be in Star Trek. And for that reason, I would say it's not proper Star Trek.
Right. I mean, I'm just curious if every proper Star Trek that we have gone through, has there been a discussion of politics in any way?
Right. And I think there have been. It just hasn't been the forefront. I think the more...
It's not the plot line.
Yeah.
Right.
The more prevalent it becomes, the less it becomes a Star Trek episode. Yeah, so I'm curious
or
to
the
see.
less likely
Right.
that it will be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for this one,
Interesting.
speaking of which, are you saying this is not a proper Star Trek episode?
This is not a proper Star Trek episode. Do you feel that it is?
I'm not entirely sure, because I mean there is the I mean
Phlox was barely in it.
Right. Right. There's a direct correlation there. I was going to say something about the Warp 5, because this is the first time they hit Warp 5 in the series.
Just do it. It happens.
They just do it, first off. And second off, that's just a chase scene. And even then, it's a chase scene that's just on the bridge. It's not even an exciting chase scene. So
yeah, they just wiggle the camera a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and they don't talk anything about what they need to do to maintain Warp 5. They just kind of like what you said. Isn't this a Warp 5 engine? Yeah, on paper.
Yeah. And they just hope that it maintains.
Right.
There's no work being done to maintain it. They just, hopefully it will keep up.
Right.
I'll check in later.
Yeah. Nope. All fair. So yeah, nope. Not a proper Star Trek, and just kind of a weak episode. Like, I wouldn't say this was a bad episode. It was just weak. It moved too slow for all of the information given. I feel like if we'd had big chunks given to us over time, this would have been a better episode. And it's so interesting to, like, the fact that we just came from a slow reveal episode from TNG, and now we're here with a slow reveal episode in Enterprise, and just how differently they were handled, to the point where we thought, despite not landing the ending of the previous episode, it was a good episode. And this one was fine throughout. It just, there wasn't anything in it that was so great that we're willing to say it was good.
To expand on what you were saying, this kind of plot line is only good when it is peripheral, where T'Pol is really struggling with something, and in this episode, it's almost like every scene she's having a problem with it.
Right.
Whereas it would be better if it was sort of just on the outside, and there's this other science fiction thing happening within the plot, but T'Pol is distracted.
Yeah.
Or something happens, and why is that? And there's a scene dedicated to it, but not an entire episode.
Right. Yeah, which is interesting, because the writers and kind of the people behind the scenes actually really appreciate this episode for that reason. You know, it's T'Pol having kind of a crisis of faith, where this person who she admired so much suddenly has fallen by the wayside. But what makes that disappointing is, in the end, it turns out that her hero is not a fallen hero. You know, she's doing the right thing, and she's actually kind of sacrificing her honor, which I feel like just makes T'Pol appreciate her even more, just to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was sort of a nice moment for T'Pol, but I don't know. Frankly, in Star Trek, I feel like character is secondary. It's important, it's necessary, but whenever it comes to the forefront of a plot line, everything else suffers to me. If you take last week's episode, what character moments are we getting through? I think I say this about every episode I like about Next Gen. There aren't big character arcs. If there are, they're not. I mean, you could say that Worf has kind of a character arc in When Silence Has Lease. Throughout the episode, he's having to control himself. He's having to control his Klingon murderous homicidal urges. And he does that a couple of times throughout the episode.
You're right.
And it's kind of the only little moment of he's trying to make himself better. There's even that part where he says, "Let's fire torpedoes."
Picard's like, "What's your damage?"
I know. He's like, "What? No, we're not going to do that yet." And
but then it's kind of like when the kid says something that's completely wrong in class, and you're like, "Explain why," and the kid gets super embarrassed. That's exactly what this was. He's like, "Let's fire torpedoes." And Picard turns around, he's like, "Explain your reasoning behind that?"
Yeah. Why? Never mind.
Yeah. No. I want to understand why my crewmate, or why my crew member would decide to do such an extreme reaction over
No, it's fine. We don't have to fire torpedoes. I said it's fine.
Right. Forgot I said anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't every other scene where Worf is like, "At ease, Lieutenant. Must breathe." He's not making it about the episode.
Right. But yeah, then he has his meltdown on the Yamato, and he says, "At ease, Lieutenant, at ease," like to himself.
Yeah. See, he says it to himself, and that's enough. That's all we need, and that's the difference, I think.
Right.
I think in terms of when you set out to make an episode of science fiction television, that you say, well, our characters need a moment. We need to have a moment that is this entire episode. I feel like that's kind of writing mumbo jumbo, where they teach you that your characters are the most important thing in your story no matter what. And that's just not true.
Right.
At least not in science fiction.
No, I would agree with. I mean, every scene should be there to move the plot forward. Even if it is a character moment, it should be there to move the plot forward. And if it's not moving the plot forward, then you either have a bad plot or you need to figure out a way to make it happen.
Exactly. They use that moment where Worf wants to fire torpedoes at the thing as a plot device, not as a character device, not to explore or unpack a character, but to say, oh, we have this unstable guy as our security chief.
I see no problem there.
He just wants to shoot everything, but it's also showing that, oh, we can't just go in guns a-blazing to this thing. We don't know what it is.
Right.
It might blow us up. We don't know. And they use that as opposed to that just being the only thing. It's like all icing in a way.
Yeah. Whereas with T'Pol, like every scene was the same discussion.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like whenever they try and explore aliens that we've just created in our minds, I just don't care. With Klingons, Vulcans, I just stopped caring for some reason. The relationship between the two, that's more fun to me.
Sure.
So we're in agreement then, not a proper episode.
Right. I mean, I don't like that we're doing binary on quality because, I don't think that this episode wasn't good. It was just weak.
Did we? Oh, we have to do the thing. Should we see what we're watching next?
Yeah. Return to Grace. Episode 14, Season 4. Oh, we're back to this guy. At First Minister Shakar's request, Kira prepares to travel to a Cardassian outpost to share Bajoran intelligence about the Klingon Empire. There's a lot of politic in that episode.
And that's probably just the opener.
Oh, yeah. Nope, that's absolutely the opener. I totally forgot. DS9. Yep.
So I guess our whole new criteria or inverse criteria of whether or not if it's political, is it going to be a proper episode? We're going to find out.
Yeah. I think that's less a criteria and more an observation. Like we are conducting an experiment at this point.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to say that Kira is having a conversation with someone and then she gets a call over the comm badge saying like she's receiving an incoming message from Bajor, or she has a visitor and Shakar shows up and she is like, oh, it's so nice to see you. And he's like, yes, indeed, but I'm actually here for a diplomatic mission. You need to present the intelligence. You need to present to the Cardassian outpost the information about the Klingon Empire. And she's like, I'll do no such thing. And they'll argue and he's like, please, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no. He'll tell her that she needs to send information about the Klingon Empire. And she's like, well, okay, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll say, it's at a Cardassian outpost. And the camera will zoom in on her and she'll have like a panic, like, I can't believe you're asking me to do this. And then it'll cut to the credits.
Why won't this guy die? I feel like he dies every time we see him in these episodes.
Oh my God, they killed Shakar.
It's what it feels like. I'm so tired of this guy.
Right?
Why can't there be a new hot Bajoran guy?
There will be, but, in like 6 years from now, when we're all done seeing his episodes. I wonder how many episodes he's in.
Unlimited.
Yeah.
It's like the void in
right
where silence has lease. We just keep the beacon just goes beep, 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 beep. We just keep passing it.
I like the idea of just us getting faster and faster. So it's just going like all right, let's go watch it.
That's fine. Okay. I've been Paul.
I've been Jonathan.
And this has been the measure of an episode.
As hopefully you knew.
Okay, bye.